This is the new 2020 Aston Martin Vantage Roadster, and it's cool. Well, of course it's cool. It's the new Aston Martin with over 500 horsepower, but it's beautiful and it's special and it's expensive, and it's just coming out. And today, I'm going to review it. Before I get started, be sure to check out Cars and Bids, which is my new online enthusiast car auction website for modern enthusiast cars. If you're looking to sell something cool from the 1980s and up, Cars and Bids is the place to do it. And if you're looking to buy a cool modern enthusiast car, you will find the best variety and daily auctions on Cars and Bids. Check it out at carsandbids.com. First, a little background. The Aston Martin Vantage came out in the mid-2000s as Aston's entry-level model, and it was offered as a coupe or a convertible. The second generation Vantage came out a couple of years ago, but it's only been available as a coupe until now. Now, Aston has come out with the new Vantage Roadster. And like the coupe, there's a lot of Mercedes AMG under the hood and inside. Power comes from a 4-liter turbo V8, the same engine in the Mercedes AMG GT. Here it makes about 500 horsepower and about 500 pound-feet of torque. It also has the same transmission from the AMG GT, and well, it pretty much is an AMG GT under the skin. But on the skin, it's far different, of course, and in my opinion, more beautiful. It's also more expensive. The Vantage Roadster, this car, starts right around $150,000. This one, with options, has a sticker price of just under $195,000. That's big money for the entry-level car, but then this is a special car. 0 to 60 in 3.7 seconds. It'll do 190 miles an hour, and it has the fastest convertible top in the car industry. Yes, that is something that Aston Martin actually highlights in their press materials. And today I'm going to show it to you, the top and all the rest. First, I'm going to take you on a tour of the new Vantage Roadster and show you all of the interesting quirks and features of the latest Aston Martin. Then I'm going to get it out on the road and drive it, and then I'll give it a Doug score. All right, I'm going to start the quirks and features of the new Vantage Roadster with getting in, and that means starting with the key, which is massive. You can see just absolutely huge. It like takes up my entire hand, which is especially an unusual trick because it only has 3 buttons: lock, unlock, and the trunk. I have no idea why it's this big. I have seen cell phones this size. Hello, I'm calling you for my Vantage key. It's really huge. Anyway, getting in, you can see the door handle here is flush up against the body. I guess that's to make it look cool. If you want to actually open the door, you push the front part of the door handle. The rest of it pops out, and then you can pull the door open. Take another look at that. That's how you open the door in an Aston Martin. Now, when you open the door, you will notice the door doesn't just open straight. Instead, it opens up a little bit. Aston Martin calls this the swan door. Not quite a gull wing, but a swan. They do this for 2 reasons. One is because it's a low car and you'll want it clear curbs when you open the door. You don't want the door to smack into anything, but also it just looks cool with both doors open, looking at it from the front. It looks, at least in Aston Martin's eyes, like a swan. I will say it is a neat look and it is very distinctive on Aston Martin models. But anyway, you climb into the Vantage, and I have to say the interior of this car is kind of a mixed bag. I would say that it's fine, but not great. There are some high points. For instance, I love the seats with these little holes in this pattern. It looks really cool, very different from other automakers, very distinctive. I also love the red stitching everywhere, Aston Martin embroidered in the seat. That all looks great. The problem is really in the center with this whole center control stack area, and there are a few issues here. For one thing, it all just kind of looks cheap. Everything in this area is plastic buttons everywhere you look, everywhere you touch. Now, this isn't a problem for a lot of automakers in their entry-level car, but when your entry car costs almost $200,000 with options, this stuff just doesn't really look all that good. And I have to say, I really don't like the font that Aston Martin uses on all of these buttons and switches. It looks like they just went with whatever the default font was for their their button and switch maker, except they made it italics, almost as if any nicer font would have been more expensive. In an age where everyone is paying so much attention to the fonts in their products, think Facebook, think Google, think Apple, it's just weird to see this ugly, kind of cheap-looking font as the default in an Aston Martin. Virtually every automaker has a nicer one. It might be a little nitpick, but when you combine that sort of cheap-looking font with the cheap-looking buttons, it doesn't look great. Another issue in the center control stack is there's simply too many buttons. I know some car enthusiasts say they prefer buttons to screens, but there's just a lot of them in here, a lot of different buttons, and it gets kind of overwhelming and confusing, and frankly, it's excessive. For example, this car has one button to lock the doors, and then a separate button elsewhere to unlock the doors. You have one button for the map light on the driver's side, and then another button on the other side for the other map light, whereas most automakers just, you press the light and they turn on. It's just a lot of buttons in here, all relatively cheap looking, all using that cheap looking font. At least the engine start-stop button looks cool. That still looks as classy and expensive as ever, probably because they borrowed it from other more expensive Aston Martin models. And by the way, around that start-stop button are the buttons that you use to change gear, park, reverse, neutral, drive. You can see they're labeled. I actually like the idea of buttons for this purpose in modern cars, kind of cleans up the center. The problem here, again, you have that ugly font. They just don't look that great, like you'd expect from an Aston Martin. And finally, one other drawback in this interior, frankly, is the climate vents. You can see the center ones right in the middle. They look fairly normal. Over on the side, they're the same climate vent, just sort of tilted, which is a little bit odd. When these climate vents first came out in Aston Martin models, it was maybe like 4 years ago, and they seemed pretty normal. But since then, automakers have gone to great lengths to conceal their climate vents, or at least make them look cool and kind of out of sight. This car, they're right in your face, and they don't really look all that good. These sort of plastic rectangles, again, not really the best look in this interior. And next up, another thing you notice in this interior, especially if you have spent time in modern Mercedes-Benz models, some of the switchgear is from Mercedes-Benz. For instance, the little dial to turn on the headlights is right out of various Mercedes-Benz models from a few years ago. Same thing with the turn signal stalk, Mercedes-Benz, and the cruise control stalk, which also comes off the steering column to the left. One interesting thing here is the fonts don't match. You can see the font from the cruise control stalk doesn't match that kind of cheap-looking Aston Martin font in the middle that I mentioned earlier, and of course that's because the buttons in the middle are from Aston, the cruise control stalk is from Mercedes-Benz, so it's kind of a weird mashup, although most people probably won't notice that or care. Now, speaking of Mercedes-Benz stuff in this car, probably Mercedes' biggest contribution to Aston Martin, aside from the engine, is the infotainment system. This is a Mercedes-Benz infotainment system, although not the newest one. It isn't the new MBUX system. In fact, I've heard it's part of Aston Martin and Mercedes' agreement that Mercedes will provide infotainment systems, but the previous generation infotainment, so Aston never quite has the best technology. Nonetheless, the benefit here is that you have a modern, well thought out infotainment system. This was used on a lot of Mercedes models, and so it was very well designed and well executed. Everything is reasonable and intuitive and well laid out. The drawback, of course, is it isn't the most modern system. It's not a touchscreen. It doesn't have a massive screen. It doesn't have a lot of the features you might get in a more recent Mercedes-Benz model. But it's better than the center screens in previous Aston models where they used a Garmin navigation system that looked so cheap and crappy. At least they have upgraded from that. I'll certainly give them credit there. Now, speaking of screens in this car, you move over to the gauge cluster and you might be surprised to see screens, full color screens, high resolution, which is what the latest automakers are doing. You wouldn't really expect maybe kind of old-fashioned Aston Martin to already be in the gauge cluster screen game, but they are, except there's an interesting drawback. A lot of automakers have one big screen in the gauge cluster and it's very configurable. This car has 3 separate screen areas, and as a result, it isn't very configurable. The middle one is always going to be your speedometer, tachometer. On the left, you have some gauges. On the right, you can change things a little, but not really all that much. And in fact, it kind of negates the purpose of having a screen at all because you can't really configure all that much about it. So basically, you're getting the same information from the screens that you would have previously gotten from an analog gauge cluster. So what's the point of screens at all? It really ought to be more configurable. But anyway, next up, we have to move on to one of this car's biggest party tricks, and that would be its roof. And like I said, yes, Aston Martin claims this is the fastest power convertible roof in the entire car industry. Before I show that to you, I want to show you where the switch is for it in a very odd place, not in the center like basically every other convertible. Instead, it's So on the driver's door panel below the window switches, there's your roof button. You pull it back and then the roof goes down, and yes, it is really, really fast. Aston says it goes down in 7 seconds. If you know anything about convertibles, you'll know that is pretty impressive. Now, if you want to send the roof back up, same deal, push the button, and then the roof goes back up. And again, it happens tremendously fast, probably about the same 7 seconds. Now, the reason that the roof is able to go up and down so fast is because it is simply so small. And that's certainly reflected in the interior space in this car. There's just not all that much. The coupe certainly feels bigger. That's even true over on the passenger side, where you have this massive dashboard that really intrudes on your knee room and legroom to an impressive degree. I was surprised. It's hard for me to get comfortable in the passenger seat of this car. It's easier on the driver's side. Now, that might be forgivable if there was a good reason for it, but it doesn't seem like there is. This car has no glove box. Over on the passenger side, nothing over here opens. You just have this massive knee room stealing dashboard that provides no real benefit. It really is a shock. With that said, if you're longing for a glove box in this interior, there is storage between the seats. You can see this little compartment here. To access it, you press this button above the compartment, the same type of button you would use to switch into gear. The compartment opens up and that's your glove box. But anyway, next we have to move on to the most ridiculous part of the interior. That would be the hood latch, which is not in the driver's footwell like every other car. Instead, it is in the passenger's footwell. You pull on this red tab and that unlatches the hood. Aston Martin is a British company. This car is engineered initially for right-hand drive markets, and unlike everyone else, they don't move over the hood latch for left-hand drive markets, so the passenger is the one who opens the hood from their footwell. It is a crazy cost-cutting decision. And next up, we move under the hood. And by the way, the hood is a huge panel, absolutely massive, rolls sort of over the fenders, a very large hood, characteristic of modern Aston Martin models. But anyway, you get under here and you can see the engine. Now, there's nothing crazy or special or unusual under here except for the engine itself, 4-liter turbo V8, like I mentioned, from the Mercedes-AMG GT, which is an impressive car in its own right. Here, it makes about 500 horsepower and about 500 pound-feet of torque. Pretty strong numbers, 0 to 60 in 3.7 seconds. Now, since I'm around front, I should mention the headlights don't really have anything weird about them, no strange lighting items, but the tail lights certainly do. For one thing, you have this strip of tail light that starts low and then curves up in the middle and then finishes back low. It's kind of an odd look, but you also have kind of a weird design with what lights up. The turn signal and brake light is on the outside, basically outside of the trunk. That part lights up. Now, inside on the trunk lid, the light bar continues and curves up. When you have the headlights on, part of that is the tail light, but not all of it. The tail light does not stretch across the middle of this light bar. Instead, that's where your third brake light is when you put on the brakes. So you have kind of this weird segmented rear light bar that makes a curve. It certainly is different from a lot of the straight, flat rear light bars you see in a lot of other modern sports cars. And next up, speaking of unusual rear lighting, there's another unusual rear light back here. That would be the reverse light. It doesn't really have a place in this light bar, so they've put it right here in the middle below the license plate. It's tremendously tiny, but it's very bright. When it comes on, there's no question what it is. Nonetheless, it's kind of hidden out of the way. Now, also down low, of course, is the exhaust in this car, which sounds pretty good. Take a listen at startup. Now, that does sound good, but it gets better. Press this little button on the steering wheel marked S, and that will change the car from Sport mode to either Sport Plus or Track. Once you have it in Track, take a listen to the exhaust then. That is a pretty good exhaust note. When you're driving the car, you hear all sorts of burbles and crackles, and there really is a lot of drama. I really like it. By the way, I also like the fact that this car has no normal drive mode. There are only 3. You have Sport, Sport Plus, and Track. No normal, no eco. Things start in Sport, as it should be for a car like this. And next up, since I'm back here, I want to talk trunk. Now, to open the trunk, annoyingly, there's no button back here. There's no trunk popper anywhere to get it open easily. If you're walking up to the back of the car and like your hands are full, you can't open it like that. Instead, if you want to open the trunk, you're limited to a button on the driver's door panel, or you can press a button on the key fob, hold it down, and that will pop the trunk, and then you can open it up. And once you do, you discover It's not really all that large, fairly small in fact, although about normal for a convertible like this. The coupe certainly has more room in back, the convertible's less practical, but you expect that if you're getting a $200,000 exotic convertible. Now, to me, the only interesting things in the trunk are on the inside of the trunk lid. For one, you have a couple of straps. You're wondering what that's for? That would be the Aston Martin umbrella. You buy one of these, you get an umbrella, or maybe it costs extra, I don't remember, but either way, this is where you put your Aston Martin umbrella. It seems so perfect for a British car company to give you an umbrella with the purchase of a car and a place in the trunk specifically designed for it. The other interesting trunk item back here is the handle to close the trunk, not just some plastic thing you pull, but instead a nice leather handle. You pull on it and the trunk closes. And when you have closed the trunk, you can see back here you have the Aston Martin wings, like you would expect, but you also have the words Aston Martin printed out. Aston didn't used to do this. They've started in recent years, I guess, to clear up any potential confusion about what type of vehicle you're looking at. Now, speaking of the outside of this car, I have to say, I think it is beautiful. It is a little fussy around back with this rear light bar thing, and it might not be as clean as the original Vantage, but this is a gorgeous car. Really handsome. Everybody looks, stares, comments. It may not have the nicest interior, it may be a little expensive for what it offers, it might not have the best infotainment, but it probably is one of the most beautiful modern cars on the road, especially at this price point. A truly gorgeous car, another great design from Aston Martin. And so, those are the quirks and features of the new Aston Martin Vantage Roadster. Now it's time to get it out on the road and see how it drives. All right, driving the new Vantage Roadster. Now, unfortunately, I have to go top up due to sound, but you can do it pretty quickly, as we saw before. And the top is now up. Pretty easy. One quick thing I want to mention, even though I told you before there is no regular mode, just Sport, Sport Plus, and Track, the truth is that Sport is pretty regular. You don't really do much. You can really tell it's a pretty boring, non-exciting mode. Sport Plus, however, which I'm in now, this car, I really like the driving experience, and I must say I like it in the AMG GT as well, but in an Aston Martin you just feel more dramatic. You feel like there's more going on, and that's kind of cool. The exhaust note when you're in Sport Plus or Track is really cool. You get some great downshifts, and you also get some great crackles and pops at lower speed. It sounds really nice in here. And it also handles well. This car is tremendously sharp to drive, to steer, which is not entirely true of the previous Vantage. I owned the last generation Vantage, and it just wasn't really all that quick to move around. It was a fine car, but it wasn't extra special. This one feels a lot more aggressive, a lot more true sports car-like, more exciting, more fun. The issues that I have are, number one, it's expensive. You can get an AMG GT for a lot less. Now, that's not an Aston Martin, which is true, but it's the same engine. I mean, it drives the same, and it's not like Mercedes AMG GT is exactly a bad name brand. The other problem I have, the big problem, is just this interior is not really that great, especially for a car that is brand new. You know, the Vantage only came out 2 years ago. Aston Martin takes their car 10 years before a redesign, so we're gonna be stuck with this interior for a while. And it already is outdated, and it already kind of looks a little crappy. Still, I see some real benefits. One is Aston Martin provides incredible bargains, lease deals, deals in general. You can go into an Aston Martin dealer, you can certainly negotiate, you can get good leases, and that makes the car kind of appealing, because when you start comparing it to 911s or even to AMG GT, with some of the deals they offer, it's not that different. And we'd all rather be in an Aston Martin, let's be clear. And especially this one, which is pretty cool. And then your only drawback really is the interior, but it's not that bad. You can live with it to say that you're in the beauty of an Aston Martin. But I do think it's pretty wild that a company so focused on design and appearance and attractiveness would design an interior that is this not great. Overall, in my opinion, this is a good car. The convertible makes it even better. I always prefer convertibles to coupes, which I know makes me at odds with a lot of car enthusiasts, but it's just better, especially where I live in Southern California. I love the convertible. It's just expensive. It's expensive for what it is, and I think this car is best bought either used or with some sort of bargain. But it is a fun, fast, good-looking car It has a few drawbacks here or there. And so that's the new Aston Martin Vantage Roadster. This is a cool car. I love the Mercedes-AMG GT, but this is better looking and more dramatic with a better brand name, Aston Martin. But it's also more expensive with an interior that doesn't quite live up to the cost. Still, this is a fun car and Aston is clearly heading in the right direction. And now it's time to give the new Vantage Roadster a Doug score.
Starting with the weekend categories and styling, the Vantage Roadster is beautiful. Still a bit fussy in the back, not perfect, but beautiful, and it gets an 8 out of 10. Acceleration does 0 to 60 in around 3.7 seconds, and it gets an 8 out of 10. Handling is sharp, not mid-engine exotic sports car sharp, but good enough, and it gets an 8 out of 10. Fun factor is also excellent with the sound and the top-down enjoyment, and it gets an 8 out of 10. Finally, cool factor, and this is pretty exciting, although not as cool as some of the rarer, low-slung exotic cars, it gets a 7 out of 10 for a total weekend score of 39 out of 50. Next up are the daily categories and features. The Vantage is reasonably well equipped, but ultimately not on the cutting edge since it's using Mercedes-Benz technology from like 7 years ago, and it gets a 6 out of 10. Comfort is good, better than a lot of exotics, and it gets a 6 out of 10. Quality is fine. There's a lot of nice stuff in here, but I don't know, those plastic buttons, that font, it could be better. It gets a 7 out of 10, which is really low for a car at this price point. Practicality is normal for a 2-seat Roadster, and it gets a 2 out of 10. Finally, value, and at a $200,000 sticker price, this is just expensive. It's amazing too, of course, fast and fun and beautiful, but expensive. It gets a 5 out of 10 for a total daily score of 26 out of 50. Added up, and the Doug score is 65 out of 100, which places it here against other relevant cars. And you can see it stacks up at the very bottom, although close behind. The real comparison is this one against its direct rivals, and you can see the Portofino and the new 911 Turbo S Cabriolet just do better. They're more fun in the weekend categories, not by much, but more importantly, they're better overall cars. Nicer interiors, they have a back seat, unusable though it is, it helps with practicality. They're faster. The Vantage Roadster is an excellent car, but a little improvement or a lower price, and it could be a great one.